Today, I'm delighted to welcome Anne Labovitz. Anne is an acclaimed contemporary artist whose work explores the powerful intersection of art and well-being. Through immersive installations, sculpture, paintings, light, and color, she creates experiences that invite people to slow down, connect, and reflect. Her research-driven engagement-led practice examines how art can foster empathy, strengthen communities, and support emotional well-being. With more than 3 decades of artistic practice and exhibitions across the US and internationally, Anne has become a leading voice on the role of creativity in building human connections.
Capricorn Connect. People, potential, technology.
Anne Labovitz, thank you so much for joining the Capricorn Connect podcast. Such a pleasure to have you on board. How are you today?
Pretty great. Excited to talk to you today. Thank you for having me.
And I would like to start the podcast with the question, who was your strongest influence in your art?
Well, my grandmother. So my grandmother was an artist, and my earliest memories are of her doing my portrait. And so I would try to sit still while she did my portrait, which I still couldn't sit still. That's kind of tricky business for me. But she used to do my portrait and talk about Martin Buber's philosophy of I, thou. So the way she explained it was this idea of where you see someone and they see you, and then sort of you have a kind of understanding and respect of each other. It might be instantaneous. And so also think about Viktor Frankl's philosophy and ideas around tragic optimism and will to meaning. And the way I think of that and the way he talks about tragic optimism is that through pain and guilt and death, we can choose one's own attitude. And so these are heavy ideas, and I think of myself as an optimist. And that optimism for me as an artist is something that I visually represent. So these ideas are really big, and they come into play in a visual way through color and mark making, and in particular scale, right? So something can be monumental scale to represent these ideas to be impactful.
Anne, I have a question for you. What was there a defining moment when you realized that art could become a vehicle for human connection?
Yeah, for sure. I think through the portraiture of my grandmother, I always knew that it was about human connection for me. And as an artist, I started out doing portraits. And then later, in the last 10 years, I've done this project called 122 Conversations, Person to Person, Art Beyond Borders. And that project was about building peace, one individual at a time, through art. And so it went to the Kurdish region of Iraq, Japan, Canada, Sweden, and Russia. And we had a couple thousand volunteers who made this process happen. And through those intimate conversations where I interviewed people in each of those countries, it was clear to me that that kind of interaction and that kind of art making process, so having all the interviews which informed the artwork. So I had these really personal, intimate, one-on-one conversations like we're having today. And then sometimes people would tell all kinds of interesting and personal things to me, which I wouldn't want to share to someone else because I wouldn't want to break that confidence. And yet there's a way for me to express those things in artworks. And so then those artworks could be monumental in scale. And for example, be at the Minneapolis airport, 180 feet. You can maybe do the math, 180 feet by 22 feet. So monumental scale, and yet represent these really intimate, personal conversations around building peace, one individual at a time. I feel like that is almost a way of doing contemporary portraiture, and also recognizing the importance and ways that we can build community and conversations and dialogue through art.
And do you remember maybe one particular story that inspired you or that stood out and you can talk about without mentioning, of course, a name?
Of course. So what I learned is that, and you're an interviewer, so what I learned is that it wasn't really about the questions. It was about leaning in and listening and really being available and providing that moment where someone was really heard. And what would happen at the end, I always at the end said, is there anything you'd like to add? And I always found that that was really interesting. Someone said, well, I think I should tell you I had breast cancer. Or I think I should tell you my child committed suicide. Or I think, these deeply personal um, stories, right, that were really powerful to me and just were indicative of what happened. And for me, in those interviews, I fell in love with every single person that I interviewed because when you pause long enough to really acknowledge and listen to someone else, people are really beautiful, all of us in different ways, right? And so um, I find that really inspiring.
And you describe color as an energy or a life force. What does color communicate that, for example, words cannot communicate?
So for me, color is my first language. I find that it's a way of expressing emotion and intensity that transcends words. And what we know is that color starts as physics, right? It comes in as wavelengths hitting the retina, and that the things that process these pathways into our lymphatic system governs our emotions. So that's why you can have a really strong emotion to color. So for me, when I do large scale works that take over your entire field of vision, that are maybe 20 meters high, then you have a different relationship to that kind of work than you do to something that's really small. And the color it's like taking a color bath almost.
And would you say certain colors represent certain emotions or have a certain effect on certain emotions? Or can you generalize here, or it depends really on the person?
Well, there's a lot of color theory and a lot of Western color theory, and what we know is that it all depends on person's lived experience, and cultures have different reactions to colors and different values around the color. For example, red in China is a special color of luck, right? And here we use it as a stop sign to alert people to something. So I think it really depends, and in a way, that's the beauty of it, right? Because you make something and you can't always know for sure how it's going to be received, even though you approach with intentionality. I think color is one of those deeply personal things.
Absolutely. And you've become a leading voice in the field of art and well-being. So I would be interested in knowing, how do you define the relationship between creativity and mental health? Maybe you can elaborate on that one.
Yeah, well, what we know, like the science tells us that viewing art, being in art-filled spaces and making art calms our central nervous system. We even know now, I read an article this week around UK's national health system. They have a 10-year plan looking at preventative methods in health. And one of the things they're looking at is bringing art into that, as well as they're also doing that in Greece, which is really interesting. I work with the Mayo Clinic, which is a very important clinic in the United States here. And they have a Center for Humanities and Medicine, and they do a lot of integrative programs around visual arts and music to help patients recover faster. We know that patients have better health outcomes when they have art encounters. So there's artists that do bed kind of activities. And for me as an artist, I have worked with thousands of people in museums and other institutions and healthcare providers, and done extensive research around the connection between art and well-being. And one of the things that I have found with healthcare providers is that they all use creativity in different ways in their practices. And they use it also with their patients in different ways. And that is really interesting, and we're just at the beginning of all this wonderful research. We know a lot more about what happens with music than we do with visual arts, for example.
So arts could also be helpful in battling depression, for example?
Absolutely. There's a prescription program, ArtRx, that some prescribers are sending folks to museums to look at art. And And we also, institutions, art museums and institutions are really interested in how they can serve their communities in different ways than they have in the past. So more integrated, more collaborative, inviting the public to participate in certain kinds of activities within the institution helps build connection and serves the communities better.
And we live in a world that is very polarized at the moment. The US is very polarized, Europe is very polarized politically. We have the tribal thinking going on. What do you think, what role can artists play in this context to maybe bring people together again?
So I think artists can do all kinds of things. I was just at the Venice Biennale. You can see what contemporary artists are doing in different ways. And for myself, I believe it's my job to address the most pressing contemporary issues, and the mental health crisis and the isolation and division are the things that I focus on in my own practice. So I think of ways to provide experiences for people to feel connected, to see one another in that way where I see you, you see me. So, but I do that through visual means. So I have something called the Well-Being Wall, where thousands of people in different institutions have participated, where they're invited to write a response to what does well-being mean to you. And then they take these squares and place them on the wall in the institution. And what is powerful about that is people read or look at the drawings or writings after someone else has placed them there. And there's both a form of connection and a kind of a feedback loop. I see you, you see me. And that kind of human engagement is really powerful. And I also do, I work with different groups, and I might be talking to someone doing an interview and also painting at the same time. And I've done it with people suffering from memory loss and dementia, where you can't ask them their name, but you can have a conversation and ask them to choose a color. And as they talk, I'm writing exactly what they are saying, and they see that feedback loop. They see the color that they chose. They see that I'm writing. And so it's like this kind of intrinsic feeling of being seen. And that kind of, there's ways of doing that. And I'm always thinking about how I can do it and make that more meaningful for people. And for example, I'm working on a commission for a US-based company that has 20,000 employees internationally, and taking kind of responses from their employees to incorporate into the piece. So it's another way of bringing multiple voices in and connecting, and then making this work about us individually and as a community in certain ways.
Is there anything else you can think maybe of examples where you can implement art into society to make it maybe more, to create a better society and have a greater impact? Is there anything else you can think of?
Well, I do think art is a conduit for connection, right? And in turn, that creates well-being. So I think there's all kinds of ways that can happen. Public art is a really good example, because public art is everywhere on the street, that there's no barrier to entry. You don't have to pay. You don't have to decide, oh, I'm going to go to a museum. It's just there. It's on the street. It's in the park. It's in your neighborhood. You're on the tram and you see it as you drive by. And I think that I don't ever underestimate the power of beauty. And thinking about when you see a sunset, for example, you feel something, right? And that is kind of, or if it's raining hard, or you go into the forest and you have that fragrance and that's green. Well, art can do those kinds of things and offer those kinds of moments of awe. And we know from awe, when we feel awe and wonder, our brains are slightly more happy, and they're more happy because we're less focused on ourselves and more focused on something else. And those kind of science things can really inform what an artist does to participate in a civic society and be a culture bearer.
So art can have a huge impact on your emotions, make you feel good, make you happier as a person, if you see art in public places.
I think so. I mean, I really do think so. And I think that more and more institutions, art museums, in order to be more nimble and more representative of our culture, they want to be that source of community engagement and offer different kinds of experiences for individuals like teenagers or young children or people living with memory loss, or so in a way serving as a community center, and not only in the art way, but in so many ways.
So also getting connected to art, and that also is helpful if you have art in public places. Also in this context, and maybe you can also talk about the challenges of promoting art in public environments like airports and museums. What is your experience there? Because you have such a vast experience in that field as well. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
So for me, I always think, okay, I'm going to do a project at a place. Well, I want the work to be deeply rooted and meaningful in that place. So to discover ways around connecting with the community, doing research so that it's meaningful and place-based for the people, right, that are there. The other thing that I think of a lot is if I'm going to do an installation somewhere, there's always things that you can't predict. You plan and you prepare and you talk it over with the team but there's always something, like there's a spigot that you didn't see that's for the fire system, or there's a security system line that's going to cross where you're going to suspend this thing. And so those kinds of things, and one has to be nimble because obviously those infrastructures within institutions are really important, right? So you can't cross those. And the other thing I think about too, when you invite the public to participate in an activity, anything can happen. And that's wonderful. And it's also, you just don't know. So you can predict-ish what's going to happen. But sometimes you have things, for example, that are poignant and sad. I had this one well-being wall, and I was going through the walls because they go deep, and there's thousands of entries. So in order to see them all, they need to be moved around. And I noticed that there was someone had written, "I didn't commit suicide." And I thought, yeah, you didn't. And you not only didn't, you shared that. So you had this kind of cathartic experience, and I can bear witness to that. And so can each other. And there's a lot that I think is powerful in that kind of connection. And it doesn't have to be that deep where it's painful so much, but I think of this visual optimism a lot in terms of the way I make my artwork. And it's really a representative of the difficulty of life and how important it is that we recognize moments of ease, and so to try to visually represent this optimistic idea. And I do that a lot with color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very fascinating. And to also conclude the podcast, I always have certain questions that I ask my guests, and I would love to ask you also this question. If you were to pick a superpower, now you can pick any superpower you want, which one would you pick?
Well, my personal superpower already is my ADHD. That's how I can work so hard. And the superpower I would pick would be, I would like to not have to sleep. I think if I could work 24 hours a day and be fully functional and capable and not tired, that would be awesome. Some people need to rest for their mental health, and I really need to work for my mental health. So
yeah, that's
more
a good
work,
one.
less sleep.
And then if you would buy your next autobiography, which one would you buy and why?
Well, I was thinking about Mark Bradford, who's an artist, and he has a ginormous monumental piece in the Obama Center in Chicago that just opened up. And I've been a fan of his for a long time. And now I'm thinking that would be a really interesting biography to read, where he comes from, his history. He started out as a hairdresser, and he's just a really powerful artist and interesting. And the things I know, the snippets I know of his life are fascinating. I'd like to learn more. I love to read, so I do a lot of reading in my ear, like a podcast. So I regularly read biographies.
To read biographies, also novels or anything else, or is it more biographies?
I really like historical fiction. I like women authors, so from sort of 1800s to 1900s, older ones, and then I love all their biographies. And then I'm currently reading Anthony Trollope. Don't ask me why. So the Barchester Chronicles, which is a pretty hefty volume of novels.
And
I love that they're talking interpersonal, so I love that. It's all about people and connecting and life.
And do you have a motto, a mission statement, a credo you live by?
I do. Embrace failure. So it's not a very popular idea these days, and I do believe that what we through failure and through risks we find discovery. Think about vaccines, for example. Of course, we know that they didn't go into the laboratory and discover like the COVID vaccine like that. I mean, it took a lot of failure, and so for me as an artist, I really embrace failure. Now, I'm not talking about having a museum exhibition and mounting something that falls over or something of that nature or isn't successful. I'm talking about in the studio, what happens. And for example, I have this series called Light Windows, and I noticed because this material I work with is Tyvek, and it's something like translucent, but not quite. You can sort of see through it. And I discovered that if you paint on both sides and light comes through it, it transforms the surface of the front. So it took me 2 years of failing to discover a way that I could successfully articulate this idea. And it was really worth it because they're magical and they're sort of light coming through darkness, that whole idea of visual optimism. And I was able to make them 6 foot by 6 foot, so quite large, and they emanate light and they're really magical. And I think that I wouldn't have, if I had thought, oh, this first one's a disaster, I'm not going to do anymore, or the 10th one that was a disaster, then I would have missed out on that magical kind of component. And as an artist, everything I do one thing leads to another thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And I'm always thinking, well, what if? And if I don't ask what if and fail, I'm trying now to work on fiberglass to do outdoor things. And they are ugly right now. Well, that doesn't mean they're going to be ugly, but I'm going to keep going. So the other thing that, which kind of ties in there, is show up. So my motto is you show up, because sometimes that's all you can do. You have someone who maybe either you have a family member or a loved one who's really having a hard time, but you can't do something for them, but you can show up. And I think also as an artist, there's sort of a misnomer that we only come to the studio and only make art when we feel inspired. Well, that's absolutely for the birds, as it were.
So that's a myth. That's a myth. Yeah.
That's a really big, ugly myth, because it's absurd. I mean, if you're a professional, you go to work. So for me, I show up every day, no matter what I feel like, because something could happen if I show up, but nothing's going to happen if I don't show up. So I come and I work. That's what I do. So I'm not ever waiting for some light bulb to go off. I mean, the light bulbs go off because they do or they don't, but you've got to show up. So I'm working all the time, every day, 12 hours a day, whether I feel like it or not. And I find that feeds itself, right? That process of showing up makes something happen, even if you feel like nothing, is going to come of it. I don't even actually think I feel that way, but I think you just have to show up in general in life for anything to happen.
Yeah, showing up and embracing failure. I love that. Anne Labovitz, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed that. And I'm looking forward to future conversations with you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here. I appreciate your asking me. Thanks so much.